Today we come together here, so a very, very warm welcome. It's nice to see so many people here from all over the place. So all the way back to Vancouver, it seems. So thank you for joining. Today we have a specific topic, so it's maybe not as open as the title might suggest. We are talking about the DNB venue database, which is a feature that has been introduced last week on last Tuesday, if memory serves, as part of the most recent upgrade of ArrayCalc. And we're going to talk a little bit about the story behind here, and hopefully be able to answer all your questions that you might have. So if there are any questions, you have probably, or some of you at least, have found the chat window. Feel free to put them in there. Please keep it clean. We've got ladies in the house as well. And one of our nice ladies is Lisa. She's in the background. She'll be collecting all the questions so we don't lose any, and we'll try to answer all of them. And all the questions that we have answered, and all of those that we hopefully, none, but all of those that we maybe couldn't answer, we'll collect them all and we'll put them into a questions answered this way around document that we'll publish at some point later this week, I hope. So nothing is lost. There were also a couple of questions from this morning session, which are maybe interesting to you. So please feel free to ask questions at any time, and we'll try to frequently have an eye on the chat to be able to see everything and answer everything. So who is in here today? I'm Janko. I'm with DNB's Education Application Support Department here at the company's headquarters in Backnang. And with me are two very dear colleagues. So one also works for the company, that's Santiago Alcalá. He's our product manager in charge of the venue database. And we also have a special guest today. You've heard him pipe up in the last couple of minutes. It's Liam Halpin. As I learned this morning, he's the winner of the second iteration of the TPI Sound System Designer of the Year Award. So he won the 2019 edition. If you're in industry, you might have met him or might have seen him work on some of the tours that go around the world. I'll leave the bragging to him if he wants to. But let's put it this way, he knows his stuff, and he's been also a great help and assistance in getting the venue database to fruition. So without further ado, I would like to hand over to Santiago, because I'm sure most, if not all of you, have already taken a look at the feature. But what you maybe don't know, or is maybe interesting, is our thinking behind it. So why did we do that? And who better to ask about that than the product manager? So Santi, over to you.
Thank you, Janko. Hi, Liam. Hello, everyone. Yes, well, our motivation for the venue database is simple. You wanted it, we wanted it. It's a win-win scenario for both parts. We wanted to provide an even better service to you, to the ArrayCalc users. This is a tool that improves an aspect of the ArrayCalc workflow that was demanded from the very beginning of the development of that project. It was always something that people really wanted and was asking for it. But it was not until some aspects of the minimum feature set of this software were created in 2017 that it was actually technically possible. Now it's finally developed and delivered for you. What do we have next? Maybe we can have a look at the current number of models that we have in the venue database. Janko,
absolutely. Let me just. Oh, come on. This way around. Oh, my screen is switching off. That's not good. Here we go.
Yeah, at this point we have 120 examples, and well, we're really very much looking forward to having more models submitted. A little bit later in this presentation, Janko is going to give you an overview of what is the process to submit a new design. This is also another part of the motivation for this product is that it creates a closer feel of the community for the users, and it's the first time that we work in this kind of interactive way in which the users are part of the development of the product and can interact with it and actually leave their mark, leave their name behind the design. So for all these reasons, that's our motivation, and we're very excited on the way it's working right now.
I'm not sure, Liam, whether you ever called, but what was your first time when you thought about, do they have maybe like a pool of venues that I can make use of? I don't know whether you ever called us about this before. Have you?
I think we may have discussed it once or twice over the years.
Yeah, so but that probably was a couple of years back already. So
yeah, I think it's been a regular conversation for almost back to the spreadsheets, hasn't it? So
yeah, so I mean, I started DNB while we were still having not a standalone application that ArrayCalc is today, that maybe is the only one that you know. But back in the day, starting with Q series, it was called QCalc. And for older series, there were also Excel spreadsheets before, but in terms of line array land, there was an Excel spreadsheet called QCalc, and later it turned into ArrayCalc when it was also supporting J, and that was quite limited in terms of how many things you can do or you could do in comparison to today. And I remember we were starting to get requests whether we did have a file for this and that venue. But as Santi has mentioned, it really took a while until ArrayCalc became a standalone application, which was, I think, around 2010. And then until we had the possibility to really place individual venue elements and not just 3 or 5 of them in a certain sequence, in a certain orientation, but freely in 3D space, and until we could represent also structural elements such as trusses and stuff like that, until it was really feasible to get that project going. So the moment in time was around 2017 when we had all those things in place, and this was roughly when we seriously started with this project. So took the better part of 3 years for us to have it. Now we have it, and as Santi has shown, there's 112 venues in there. From the get-go, it was important to us to make every effort to not have an empty database or just 5 venues in there, but a sizable stock. And as you can see, there is 2 very obvious markets which are at the moment represented quite a bit. So the United States being a huge market for the live industry, and obviously several countries in Europe, most notably Germany. But that's not, all that can be there. So this is not all the venues in the world which are relevant, not nearly. So we are hoping to expand this in the future and to also have your help with this, because that only works as a community effort. And speaking of how it works, like I said, you've seen, you've probably tried it out already, but let's maybe have a look and take a look at the details to get a better understanding why it is the way it is. So let me get rid of my PowerPoint for right now. Can you see my ArrayCalc? Is that visible, Liam?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for those of you who haven't found it, there will be very few people who haven't found it, but for those of you for whom this is new, if you go into the venue editor, it now has this little button here, venue database. And as long as you're online, you need to be online for that, because it's an online query to our database server, basically. You can get a list of venues that you can also search by complex, if it's a campus or a building with several rooms in it, or by city or by country, and then get a result. And let's pick one. We are here near Stuttgart, so let's see what we have in Stuttgart, in Germany. We've got 2 arenas in Stuttgart currently in there, but rest assured, it's not only about arenas. I mean, arenas are a very obvious example of a venue that needs quite elaborate planning for a PA system to go in there, but I would say everything beyond a whatever 1,000 to 2,000 capacity venue, where it's a little bit larger, where there's maybe balconies, and it's not just two speakers on a stick where, planning is not really required. This is what makes sense to be represented in there, as long as it's some kind of a touring venue. So it's just as viable for a lot of theaters, medium to large size clubs, and such venues to be part of the venue database, not just arenas, but in Stuttgart, we currently only have 2 arenas in there. So let's take a look at the Porsche arena, which I think is a nice example. Let me just pull this window a little bit bigger. So obviously we can see a preview here. We have the venue geometry in there, who would have thought, but as Santiago has maybe hinted to before, it's about providing a little bit more comprehensive information. This was important to us when we started to think about what should be in there. The venue file itself, that's very clear. It's called a venue database. But what else makes sense to have in there? And I don't know, Liam, maybe you have a story or two about what your biggest pain points were when you were trying to get information about a venue that you were supposed to do a gig in the past. And sometimes they're very generous and they have great packages, but sometimes they just don't. So what was one of the biggest pain points there for you?
It's actually been getting better over the last few years, where I've been able to get, I've been chasing up for the CAD drawings on the venues for a few years now. And a lot of that stemmed from the developments in ArrayCalc and the fact that with array processing, the accuracy of the processing really comes down to how accurate the venue drawing is, and how, effectively it's how accurate the information you feed into the software helps with the accuracy of the results you get out of it.
I think that's a really good point. So with array processing in particular, accuracy becomes a whole new meaning. It's not just, there's people back there more or less point a speaker. Now that's very much derogative now, but partially that's how we had to do it with array processing. It's a different ball game. So precision is certainly one thing that needs to be present in the venue model.
Yeah, so actually getting the CAD drawings out of the venues in advance has allowed me over the last few years to really spend a lot of time trying to get that degree of accuracy into the model. The CAD drawings that turn up are quite, shall we say, a range of quality, and they're not always CAD drawings. In fact, there's at least one venue that's in the database there that was actually, it took me about 3 or 4 days to go through and convert the PDFs that had been scanned from the architect's original pen drawings that the building was built to. So that one took several days of sort of conversion to get it into a format which would allow me to actually take the measurements and then to translate it into a pretty accurate drawing of within ArrayCalc. So yeah, the venues are getting better. Sometimes you still get side elevations that don't quite marry up, or it's always fun when you get half a dozen different drawings and when you try and compare them to each other, they actually conflict. In those sort of situations, I tend to just draw it out in 2 dimensions from the plans, and then I'll combine it with the measurements that I'll do on the day to actually extrude it into 3D. But
that's, by the way, a nice trick. So if you can only get plan views, which for some reason is still the case every now and then, at least get your plan view right, because the elevation is something you can easily and quickly measure on site with your laser distance finder. But then most of the work you have already done, and you just need to pull up, the front and the rear of your individual venue elements to match the actual elevation. So that's a really, really neat trick there. And speaking of elevation, in arenas, it's a little bit easier because pretty much wherever you look up, there is something that you can hang stuff from. But if the venues get smaller, theaters, larger clubs, where there is maybe the house point or the 2 house points that you get to use, or the audio truss, and that's what you get. And even, I believe it was Madison Square Garden, there's basically 2 points that you get, 2 specific points So even though the place is huge and very well renowned, you have to know where those points are. So having an idea of where the X and Y and Z coordinates of those points are at their highest extension, aka where your first hook of whatever you're bringing gets connected to, that's a quite valuable addition. So having some kind of an overview or some kind of indication what the rigging situation is like in there, we felt that that was a pretty valid addition, because otherwise you have we have the venue geometry, and if you cannot assume that you can hang whatever you want wherever you want, all of a sudden it becomes quite interesting to know. And this is why we have this also in here. So when we talk about the rigging situation, this is something that we would like to be able to specify what is the clearance to the house grid above the venue floor, or the clearance to whatever it is that you attach your stuff to. If it's not a grid, if it's a beam or a truss. And if there is anything particular going on with regard to rigging in that venue. And this Porsche Arena venue in Stuttgart is a nice example. Let me import that into ArrayCalc. And now probably again, the fact that I'm screen sharing in Zoom is making this a little bit slower than it should be, but it works. At some point, probably. There we go. So you can see it here in the side view. There is double sets of beams in this place, and those are the only beams you can rig off, and you always need to bridle because you can only rig off of the upper pair, and the lower pairs are structural elements that you must not touch with anything. So it's always a bridle point going in between here. That's chapeau to whoever designed this. Certainly makes your day longer. But you need to know these kinds of things, and because that gives you an indication where stuff can go. And this is very specific, and it's it's not a million beams, it's just 6 sets of them. So that is something that absolutely makes sense to be represented in the venue model, even though it is not really acoustic, but it can become acoustic in a great big hurry if whatever the venue has simply will not accommodate your rigging plot just like that. Less common in arenas, but it still can be a pain. And if you have these kinds of little hints in there as part of the venue model, and maybe also as this gentleman that has provided this venue here has commented in here, that really, really helps. Let's go back to the database in here. So what other stuff do we in here? And Liam, we talked about this, what might be meaningful, what helps people like you that do touring a lot. There is information that sometimes is quite surprising. Again, you wouldn't think that this happens for arenas, but I remember you telling me that some places in America, for example, the loading dock is not where you think it is. What was that one story you told me?
Yeah, just effectively wandering around the building to try and find a ramp when the bus is parked outside, and discovering that the entrance to the loading bay is actually a block away. It's always fun at 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning when you're half asleep.
Yeah, so it can be a little bit confusing, and it doesn't have to be an arena. It could be a theater, a city like London that has a ton of theaters, and I'm sure the loading entrances and the logistics involved are not always as you would expect. So I'm sure there's quite a few places where you have to push stuff into a small, tiny lift, or where there's some kind of a lifting platform outside, and I know a couple of venues here in Stuttgart where you have to cross-load from the big truck onto a smaller truck because the big truck is not allowed to enter, or you have to forklift everything in. All of those are things which would be nice to know beforehand, and sometimes they do provide this information, sometimes they don't. And whenever they don't, this is usually when it starts being fun. So we have a possibility to put that information here. And that just gives a more comprehensive picture in our effort to make the whole package be more useful. So you can use those fields here to simply give this non-specific, not quantifiable in meters necessarily information that just adds up to the whole picture when thinking about how to do a gig in this particular venue.
It's probably worth noting as well that some of the venues kind of do make sense to have the individual beams or spans drawn in. But when you've got this kind of standard grid, 12-foot square grid all over, in the way that's represented in a lot of the venues is actually just as a rigging zone, effectively.
Yeah.
So there's been a trade-off between the amount of detail in the drawings versus the number of planes that you're going to see when you download them.
Yeah, absolutely. So in arenas, many a times there's just a load-bearing grid in the roof, and it doesn't really matter where the individual beams are, because chances are you will bridle some of them anyway, because it's not guaranteed that there's a beam exactly above your rigging point. But as long as you know within this area, I can create the pick points that I want, be it with a bridle, that's no big deal for the riggers. But at least you know during your planning, okay, if I don't stray outside of, let's say, the rigging zone, I have a very easy time doing that. Let's maybe stay with this model, and while we're at the venue editor in here, what might be apparent to you and what might also be apparent from the drawing that you see on the screen, there's quite a bit of color coding going on. Why did we do that? I mean, everybody probably color codes their stuff, but that's also a topic of standardization that we are trying to achieve here. We simply apply a color code that is specific to the, let's say, height level or floor of the building. So that stuff that is on the bottom of the building always has the same color, and stuff that comes above it and so on and so forth. And I think it was you, Liam, who brought me to the idea to, while this is also rainbow colors, to just stick with the resistor color code, because that's what many people use for stuff anyway.
Yeah, it's an international standard, isn't it? So when talking about colors, in theory, it makes it easy then for everyone to either, if you don't already know it, you can look it up. It's freely available and in many different places.
Absolutely.
To remember something custom.
Yeah, so I started with something that was rainbow colored, which wasn't that far off, but it just wasn't that, and that might have been even more confusing to people who are used to resistor color code everything. And being that is a, as you said, recognized standard, where people also do their cables in and stuff very frequently, we said, hey, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And along with the color code or color convention that we would like to see, or that we follow in every venue that we have in the venue database, we also follow a certain naming convention, and that needs to be flexible, because some venues have very specific names which are well known by the house crew and by frequently visiting productions and engineers for the individual height levels, while others might not have that. So we need to be able to accommodate for both. So in cases where it's not really name coordinated, like in this particular venue, we said we start at the lowest level and we call that 100, and the floor above that is 200, and so on and so forth, until we reach whatever the highest level is. And this is what you can see along with the color coordination here in the naming. But if you have a venue where the individual floors have a certain name, sometimes it's a sponsorship name, or in theaters they've got very traditional names, it makes no sense to force another naming structure on top of that. So as long as you stick with the well-known naming structure, that's all fine. Goal again being the overlaying principle. You're not doing the venue model for yourself. If you contribute something to the venue database, or if you think about something that should be in there, I like to call this the pay it forward principle. I'm not really doing it for myself today, where I can take all sorts of shortcuts and I can be lazy with naming and lazy with colors, because for this half hour where I really need this, I can remember everything that I did and I can save the time. But if I'm preparing this for somebody that I don't know, I have no idea who will be downloading this later, that potentially doesn't know anything about the venue other than the fact that he's supposed to be doing a gig in there and has gotten maybe so-so information from the venue itself or from the production in advance, it's a whole different ballgame. So this is also the reason why we have specific color sets, why we try to stick to a specific naming set, why we ask for the structured elements to be in there, because we simply need to be a little bit more strict when we do this kind of technical documentation, which is essentially what it is for somebody else. So hopefully you can understand this motivation here. And if you say, hey, I also have a couple of venues that I think I would really like to contribute, hey, that's absolutely fantastic. Like Santiago said, it's a community effort. It lives off of the fact that many people share stuff. You already do share information. For example, in the Facebook group, you do help each other. And this is the same thing. It's just a little bit more formalized in order to have it in a meaningful framing. And as Santiago said, you can put your name on it. So if you agree to that, we will mention your name as the author of a venue file in the database. So this is, I guess, the first time that you can actually, what did you say, Santiago? Make your mark, I think it was. Those are your words. Make your mark on a DNB product. There are a lot of marks in DNB products that you simply can't see, because we do get a lot of suggestions and ideas from people that end up as a part of a product very frequently. But this one is super direct. So you can say, this is the venue, this is what I did for everybody else, and all the others are stuff that somebody else did for me. So absolutely a fantastic opportunity to be a part of the team here. I can see there's a question in the chat here. So it's, can we upload our own venue drawings, and is there a vetting process? I may have missed this if it was mentioned at the start. Actually, you haven't missed this. We are leading up to that in explaining why all the details are here. There is a process for submission. We'll come to that in a second. And there is a vetting process, which expressly means you need to go through me because it all ends up on my desk. So if you want to make my day a little bit longer, submit a lot of stuff, I'm happy to look that over and process that. So what we do is we obviously check for all those formalities, whether that has been met. And if there's something unclear, we'll get in touch with you and try to clarify that, just to make sure that we can keep the high standard that we started with, so that stuff stays relevant for everybody. Now, to continue with our standardization, aside from knowing where the rigging points are, it's also very important to have a fixed point of reference in the venue. Now here, Liam, I think we can all agree that's very easily visible. So center of the center. I always joke, this is when you look at the sidewalls, this is where you have half a meter supply of gaffer tape, because everybody's marking the center of the center over everybody else's marks, and that really makes you be good friends with the house staff, I'm sure. But how important, or can you elaborate a little bit on how important having a good or a valid point of reference is when you get a plan, a drawing like that from somebody?
Yeah, well, I suppose when I've been drawing the arenas, I tend to veer towards the sort of center spot of the ice pad, or some fixed reference like directly underneath the center of the scoreboard, if it's not, so that when you walk in each day, because the stage could be set up, most arenas have movable stages, so it's a case of any given day it could be anywhere in the building. So having that fixed reference allows you to put the stage in the right place, and obviously then move the origin if you're importing arrays, or do whatever you need to do to make it relevant for your show. If it's a theatre, then I'd usually use either the center point of the downstage edge of the proscenium arch, or if there's a fixed stage, maybe use the downstage edge, because invariably that ties in with rigging plots and other files that you're working with other departments. So yeah, I mean, you can't put the arrays in the correct place unless you know where they're going in the venue. And if they're not in the right place in the drawing, then you, as we've said, the AP processing may be wrong, or you could even be in the wrong loading zone, for which is going to keep the rigger happy.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, your results may vary if you do that. So since for arenas where it also makes sense, as in this place that is very symmetrical, to make use of the symmetry while drawing, so you don't have to draw all of the individual elements. It's meaningful to have the origin, the global origin, in the very center of the center. And as Liam has said, typically rigging plots for systems, they reference the downstage center edge of the stage. And if you know where that is with reference to that point here, you can simply move your origin, whatever, 20 meters backwards in the X direction. And then that becomes your new origin. And when my screen sharing allows me to update, we'll also be able to see that. It's amazing how much processing power Zoom takes away from the computer. Here we are. So this would now be our stage edge of the show of the day, but maybe for somebody else, this is somewhere else in the venue. So having a fixed reference from where you can start, this really, really helps. The important thing obviously being, if it's not a place like this one where it's very obvious, you know, where the center of the center is, make sure that whatever you pick is something that somebody coming into the venue can visually identify, and make sure that you note that reference here in the venue comments. So just say 000 is at whatever, front center edge of the fixed portion of the stage, if they have an extensible stage, fire curtain line, back wall, whatever they have, so that everybody is starting from the same place and is not confused. So we talked about the color coding, we talked about the name coding. We can see this particular venue here. Let's go to the 3D view. The gentleman who's provided that for us has done a great job. Here we go. In terms of also modeling the vomitories, which is quite nice. Oh, come on, screen sharing, that's boring. There we go. Take a look at the side view. So all the vomitories are modeled here. So that's an absolutely great and totally sufficient level of detail. You might notice there is no visibility of any kind of staircases or something like that. He just checked the rake of the tiers, and he found, as it is true for many places, that the incline is the same for all of the lower tier and for all of the upper tier. So he's approximating that with one plane. So you don't need to go overboard, have all the stair steps in there. That's just time consuming and doesn't, make the prediction any more precise. Do abstract where possible, but be, as precise, as detailed as necessary. So you really see what the venue is and you can orient yourself in there. And since orienting yourself in a venue is such an important part of the deal, in this case, for example, facilitated either by the vomitories or by looking where are those ceiling beams, so you know where you are. We also have one more feature that we have in there, but we need to access this from the venue editor, then it works. We have decided we would also try and provide photographs from different set angles. What was the example that we picked before? The Bridgestone Arena, I think it was.
I think it was.
The Bridgestone Arena in Nashville, I think that's one of yours. Yeah, that's one of yours, Liam. We have a couple of shots that we request, but which are optional because it's completely clear that not everybody will have the possibility to take photographs. Sometimes, I think you had the issue on your last tour, the video and lighting guys needed a dark room very quickly to be able to calibrate their stuff. So
yeah, I mean, it was a pretty long day because we were because of the shall we say the 3D elements that we'd added. It extended my day quite a lot, as well as, and the show in general was, we were loading, and rigger call was 5 a.m.
Whoa.
And so there wasn't much of an opportunity to get the photos until during the loadout, when I'd completed my part of the loadout. So, and unfortunately, we started discussing this and working towards it at the end of a US run last year. And so, and funnily enough, we haven't had that many runs this year to increase the number of photos. So there's been quite a lot of work done on venue files while there's been no gigs happening. But it has unfortunately meant that there's not quite as many photographs to go with those venues as there could have been.
But in this particular case, we do have all the photographs. So let's maybe take a quick look. Why photographs? Well, we said it's one way to connect better with the actual venue, because this drawing here still is quite a bit of an abstraction. Okay, that's not that venue, but never mind. Let's import that so it actually shows the right place. So this is Bridgestone Arena, actually. And there you can also see the aforementioned rigging zone. So this is the area where you have a grid where you can pretty much hang anything wherever you want with minimal bridling. So no need to represent a million beams in there if it's a really tight grid. And a photograph also shows quite a few things that are otherwise difficult to express in prose or fields with numbers. So if you want to know whether there's railings or barricades within the tier, which might happen, so don't know about the US, but this is the fact in quite a few German arenas, you can't just walk up all the tiers, so there's different sections that are quite fenced off. If there's, glass barriers somewhere, all of those are things that a photograph can reveal much more easily than somebody having to describe all of that stuff. So what we typically ask for, if possible, like I said, it's optional. So if you have the possibility, we are really happy to have those shots. If not, that's life. We'd like to have one looking from the auditorium towards the end where the stage typically is. We would like to have one the other way around, because that also shows you, depending on how dark the place is, elements of the ceiling grid. Is there some significant obstacles that maybe don't come across as concretely in the drawing? Having some kind of an isometric view to see, what the vomitory structure and what the in between the boxes structure is, that helps getting a better perspective of what the venue looks like. And obviously also looking into the wings of both sides. Now, given a lot of arenas might be fairly similar to this, but who knows? Sometimes there's, concrete obstacles in the way. It's not just a removable area of seating. It really depends on the venue, and it becomes interesting when we go into smaller venues like theaters, where you don't really have all the space that you want, as you might have it in an arena frequently. So having these perspectives here, looking towards both sides, can really help in getting an idea of how to set up for the day. And finally, since this is where the day really starts and really ends, so this is after coffee and before beer. I think this is the right way around, depending on which time zones you're traveling through. It's also interesting to have a shot of the loading dock. So what is the loading dock situation like? So is it very spacious, or is it, just two trucks at a time and it looks like it's a long corridor? And what does it look like from the outside? So, how much space is there to maneuver with your vehicles? So this is not the equivalent of a drawing, but it gives you the idea and just gives you a better picture before you ever come to the venue the first time. And I'm not sure whether this kind of stuff is really included in many of the advanced packages. So you be a better judge of that, Liam.
Yeah, there's quite often notes in the tech pack that most venues send to the production manager, but of course that doesn't always filter through to the crew. Generally, when I'm starting to prepare for a tour, I'll try and actually call through to the venues to chase up a plan drawing showing the seating as it's going to be for our show, along with a stage position for our show, side elevations, and a copy of the standard tech pack. And then, because quite a lot of venues will tend, when they get asked for a CAD drawing, the first thing they'll send out is the rigging plot. And sometimes that will show part of the venue underneath the grid. I have been sent quite a few venues where all you get is a copy of the grid and no references to the rest of the building at all. And you kind of go, well, what is that? So invariably, it then takes a couple of phone calls to go through and go, no, actually, what I need is a seating plan. And I don't mind if the grid's in it, but I need something to actually show me where the audience will be, not just what's holding up the roof.
Yeah, that's the thing. By the way, fun fact, a couple of the venues, I think 6 or so, have actually been done by riggers and lighting people. So we invited our brethren. I don't think there was any video guy in there, so Sorry for that. But we also invited our brethren from neighboring departments to contribute, and we found a couple of people from the, let's say, lighting and rigging genre that also had quite valid plans, but they reported exactly that. So what, I mean, for them, it's fine, but what they usually get and what they had loads of were rigging plots. But they did also have a couple of drawings of, complete drawings of venues that allowed them to supply that as a venue model.
It's also interesting that one of the things that I've been discovering more recently is some venues have actually expressed reluctance to actually send out the CAD drawings because of the fact that with the constant terror threats that are going on at this point in time, some venues have been sort of saying, oh, well, we can't send out the CAD drawing because it contains structural data. So that's where a conversation can be really useful, and just going, well, I don't actually need the structural data.
Yeah.
Hit delete. All I'm interested in is, where are the audience going to be?
Yeah, so
I don't need to know what holds the bleacher up.
This stuff here is not really going to be useful to somebody who wants to blow up the building, because you can see that there's a building even without that. But that's yeah, let's say that's sometimes an area of maybe oversensitivity or increased fear that information such as that one might immediately lead to disaster. When, if we for a moment afford that, usually gigs don't get bombed, thankfully. The disaster is much more looming when you don't get proper information to plan the gig, because then you have, I don't know, 30,000 people who paid quite a lot of money for a ticket, and they didn't get served appropriately.
To be fair, the venues that have expressed concerns on the initial contact have actually sort of relented once you've actually explained what it is you're trying to achieve with it. So
oh, that's good. That's good to know.
And admittedly, it did help that I think one of the venues I had that conversation with was quite a small venue in a backwater part of the US. And when I pointed out that I already had all of the CAD drawings for major venues in New York and Los Angeles, they kind of went, all right, fair enough.
Yeah, so sometimes it's also a, questioning whether this particular venue would necessarily appear in a, don't know whether those guys have a target book, but yeah, so maybe not as relevant, not as dangerous. So go to gigs in smaller, out of the way places. Those are really safe. So yeah, now all kidding set aside, sometimes this becomes an issue, but thankfully, as we've heard, with meaningful conversations, people can be convinced that maybe the problem is not as grave as they feared it to be. But all in all, there is a certain amount of effort involved in getting the right information, and then if you can then conserve this, so that maybe also the venue doesn't get those constant phone calls.
Well, that's actually one of the benefits of Nashville being in there, actually, because the venue that I was talking about, where they only had the scans of the original line drawings, was actually Nashville. So that was, as you can see, it's quite an intricate plan of it. So yeah, took a little while to get that one done, but I was quite pleased when I finished it.
I've just seen we have another question in the chat since a couple of minutes, I guess. I see some of these venues do not have walls drawn in. Is that something that needs to be considered when submitting drawings? That, thank you for the segue, is an excellent point to move away from ArrayCalc and to expand on how can you, if you would like to, and we'd really welcome that, if you would like to submit something, how do you do that? Then there certainly is some kind of a process, and there is, let me just bring up this thing again. So contributing, how does it work? There is basically 2 or 3 things that you need to consider. First of all, the venue database as it is a great reference with regard to the level of detail that is meaningful. So if you have a comparative venue to one of them that's in there, and you figure out, whatever I have has substantially less detail than what is shown in there, then maybe it's worth another look. So you can get a good feeling, you know, what is the level of detail that is meaningful, that is helpful. And we also have that in writing. So a lot of the stuff that we talked about, is one of them is this one here. So I said this in the beginning, what are we interested in? Venues that get toured, obviously, and venues which are large enough so that it's not 2 speakers on a stick for so where planning takes place. I think that goes without saying. But with regard to having this documented, we have it's a 4-page document on our website. You'll find this on every language version of the website, never mind whether it's English, French, German, Chinese, Japanese, whatever. You'll find this in every language version of the website on the ArrayCalc product page under downloads. There's always a downloads section, and it has the installation files, and it also has a file that's called CNB Venue Database Requirements for Venues. So there's this document, which basically, let me find that here. We'll not read it together. I'll just just skip through it real quickly with you. If this allows me to show it, come here. Where is it? Oh, there, hiding below the 10 other windows. So it outlines in the beginning why we have certain formalities and how they work. So for example, the color code and the accuracy, the origin stuff, the naming, and so on and so forth. You can read that on your own time. And then we have a couple of form fields, which basically give the data that we can later input into the additional information fields in there. And some of them are mandatory. So the ones that have this little arrow symbol, these are mandatory. We need to know them. The others are optional, like the images, which understandably not everybody will have taken or is going to be able to take once they visit a venue. And this is what we would like you to fill out. This is what we need to be filled out in the appropriate way. Down here, it finishes up with a bit of information about you. So don't worry, we will not publish that unless, at least your name, we will not publish unless you specifically agree to that. And we'll send you an email. You'll be getting this way around an email from me expressly asking for your permission whether we may show your name as the author of that particular venue. Otherwise, it's going to be completely anonymous to everybody else. And then when you've collected all of this, here's a bit of instruction how this needs to be handled, where this needs to go, so that it falls into the right bucket, basically, and we can pick it up from there and process it. So like I said, this document is available on the webpage. And once you have all of that, now back to my fancy drawings here, then it's a 2-part process. So you collect the information that is necessary and required and meaningful, put it together, take care of the coloring, the naming conventions. Then you submit that via the publish process, and then it's on our plate, because we do, as I explained, the double check, whether all the formalities have been met. We'll, for example, also, if you haven't done that already, blacken all the faces in photographs, because that's a privacy thing. People have a right not to be recognized in photographs, and we'll blacken all the faces and blur all the license plates to make sure that that's also cool. And then in the end, once we have your permission or have clarity whether or not we may name you as the author, we'll then go ahead and publish this. And with all of this, as also mentioned, the document comes a little bit of legal prose. Obviously, whatever you submit must be your intellectual property. So it's first of all morally improper, and it's also illegal to submit something that's somebody else's work. So every ArrayCalc file that you have created yourself from whatever means is basically something that you might be able to submit, except if you have a contractual relationship with your employer that expressly forbids you to use the work that you did during that employment for something else than that actual gig. And some companies handle it like that, and that's perfectly in their right. You just need to make sure that you're allowed to use that. We can't know that, so that's up to you to check, whether your production has a problem with you sharing the venue model. You're not sharing the loudspeaker design. You're not sharing the set list or pictures of the artist or something like that. It's really just a raw venue model. So there might also be misconceptions which could be clarified, like the phone calls Liam makes, where he says, no, I'm not interested in the structure. I'm just interested in where the audience areas are. And with regard to that, because the question was about walls, it's clear that around stuff we have back and side walls, but typically for anything that's an audience area, or hopefully there's not going to be a wall in between the seats and the stage, at least I hope, because that might be difficult to put sound into. So if there's an obvious obstacle that is really noteworthy and that you need to work around because you need a delay in that particular corner because it maybe has line of sight to the stage but not line of sight to a typical PA position, please do represent that in there as a structural element. If it's just a back wall or a side wall that doesn't block anything from anybody, not necessary at all. So think about what is meaningful, what would you want to know when putting a system in somewhere, and if that falls into that category, it should go in there. If it's just something that makes it look nicer, you're very welcome to do that, but it's not necessary.
Actually, we've just had a question come in about ghost planes for array processing, and this actually ties all of it together quite nicely, because we did discuss about walls and ghost planes and any sort of back wall extensions for the upper levels, and the problem that we came across was that no two system techs do it the same way. So you have the trade-off between, if you put a back wall into a lot of the more complex venues, you'd end up at least tripling the number of planes that are in the drawing. In a similar way with ghost planes, some people use arc segments, some spanned off of different points. Some people use just a set height wall at the back of the upper level. Some people like to have those ghost planes in between every single level. So the decision was kind of made between us, and I'm sure Janko discussed it with various other people before coming back to me with it, and the decision was made to make the venue, the audience areas of the venue, the focus, with some additional elements for scoreboards, rigging elements that were helpful, while all of the files are still completely editable from once they're downloaded. So you can switch off all those rigging elements if you're using the 3D plot and they're just getting in the way, or you can actually add anything that you want to them. So the focus was to get the actual, the closest representation of the actual venue. And then it's not intended to eliminate those design decisions that we all make every day.
Yeah. So if we take this example here, so if somebody were to put in ghost planes, and maybe we should lose 30 seconds to explain to everybody who's here what those ghost planes are, what array processing, why array processing needs this. So in the past, it has been a good practice to take the main arrays and to overshoot them over whatever the top end of the audience was, in order to still get sort of okay coverage here off axis. So in an area where that's typically still within the coverage angle of the main array, but that since it's closer is at a vertically steeper angle towards the main array. So if you do not overshoot the main axis, you might not get sufficient coverage off on the side. So previously we just pointed the upper 1 or 2 or maybe 3 boxes higher up. That was that. With array processing, you can obviously still do that, and geometry still applies. If something's not aimed somewhere, there's not going to be HF there, really. But array processing always requires a target. So a box in array processing always needs to be aimed at something. That something usually is an audience plane, like that one here in the back. But in order to overshoot to somewhere where there is nothing, at least in the drawing, you need to add an artificial, or we call it a ghost plane. And if you were to do that in a preparatory way for every, top tier plane and for every, one below and one below to your plane in the whole venue, you'd end up with, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 more planes than what the venue actually needs to represent it. When effectively, should you really want to do this with array processing, you'd only need one ghost plane in that one spot where the array is above whatever your actual audience area is. And that's drawn in really, really quickly, and it really cuts down on the plane count. So this is why we said it's nice that some people go to the effort and, you know, put ghost planes around everything just in case an array could be aimed there. But effectively, when you consider the amount of time that it takes to do that versus the amount of time it takes to create 1, 2, 3 planes here and mirror them to the other side and maybe do the same thing for the side hang here, that's done within a minute instead of spending, I don't know, half an hour or an hour extending with an additional set of planes all the planes that go around. So that is something that's up to, like Liam has said, to the system tech of the day, because the stage will be in a slightly different position every single time. The rigging plot will be different, so stuff will be aimed slightly differently. And that's why ghost planes are to be taken care of the system tech of the day of that show. That's his responsibility, just like, you know, aiming the PA is. And this is why we don't have them in there. So just to sum that up, I had a model submitted to me for a well-known concert hall, and he used the SketchUp functionality, so ArrayCalc Exchange, the SketchUp extension that we have, and he had some CAD drawings which included the walls. Now, when he gave that to me, it took forever to load, which was already suspicious, and I saw, there's maybe 100 planes that model the concert hall, which as they go has a lot of little balconies and stuff like that, but there was about 600 planes that came out of the walls because it was a very delicate wall structure where it was immediately clear, okay, that's just over the top. Yeah. So like I said, because there was another question of, you know, what is the process to make sure that you have the level of detail that's required. If it can be in the way, it's meaningful to have it in there. If it can never be in the way because it's always behind something or always to the side of something, that's becomes a hobby, let's say. Yeah, so a visual cosmetics hobby. Yeah? So that's what I would consider to be a meaningful distinction between, does it need to be in there, or is it something that, you know, satisfies my OCD, which is fine. We all have those. So we all nerd out like you wouldn't believe, but it's not a requirement to have them in there. I think that pretty much takes us to the end of our content. The question is, do you have any further questions? So, oh, thank you. There's a good feedback. Thank you. I'll name you here, Dakota. Thank you very much. And yeah, as one participant has noted, there are still a couple of ghost planes in some venue files that we left in there that you can use as a reference. But really think about when you're doing array processing and you need to overshoot something, the ghost plane only needs to be wherever the main axis of the array is pointed, not around it. Doesn't have any relevance. So that single one thing is dropped in very easily and quickly. Yeah, if there are any more questions, we'll be happy to take them now. If you come up with other questions, then if you don't manage to do them now, support@dbaudio.com is the email address of choice that ends up on our desk, and we'll do our best to answer them. And as said in the beginning, we'll also compile all the questions that we had today and put them into a document that we'll publish, I guess, on the website. We'll announce that, so you can have all of that in writing. So I'm not sure whether we've gone over that particular question, so I'll read that one aloud. Could Liam or DNB do a video of a process to get as detailed as you have in some of the venues that might help with improved standardization, not to be confused with the basic videos? So I know you're using a little bit of a special tool, which is maybe not as common with everybody, Liam. Maybe you can elaborate on that, how you, for example, got to this one here, or was that no, that was off of drawings, right?
Yeah, this one in particular, the side elevations were actually a PDF of the scanned engineers drawings. But generally, what I'll do is tend to open up the plan view, and I'll actually draw each of the planes as I see it going into ArrayCalc on a fresh layer in the CAD drawing, and then by isolating that layer so that you're only looking at that one, it then allows you to use the tools within the CAD package to actually find that center point of the plane, the width at the front, the depth, the width at the back, and the rotation. So I found that to be the quickest way that and the way that I tend to build them up is by working on that plan view and then extruding it into the 3D from using the elevations. The elevations also help with identifying things like quite often the balcony will be expanded in a CAD drawing so that the venue can create a seating plan that shows all of the seats. So with those drawings, it's quite useful to have the elevation to show you the reality of the overhangs between the different layers of suites or seats. I know some people use SketchUp, and it kind of comes down to whatever you're most comfortable working with, really. Yeah. I've started playing around with trying to import CAD drawings into SketchUp to then use that as a middleman into ArrayCalc. And for me, I just find that I find the quickest way is to actually do a manual copy over once I've effectively simplified the CAD drawing already.
I think that's a great point. The simplifying. Yeah? So I think we touched on that before. If you look at this red or orange piece of grandstand here, so that certainly is not just one surface in reality. It will have, you know, steps and stairs and seats and stuff like that, but all of that is really irrelevant for the acoustic planning. You need to know what is the rake, so what is the incline of that piece of venue, and if you can find a continuous section that has the same incline, that has the same height in the back, it's absolutely legal and valid to represent it like it has been done here. So that's a great piece of the simplification. And so that counts for whether you do it like Liam does it, you use any kind of CAD package to, you know, work on the drawings, or whether you put this into SketchUp, because of course you can import a DXF with all the railings and lights and cables and whatever it might have, and the terrorist structural detail into SketchUp and then try to hit the export button, but it will end up in a mess of hundreds and hundreds of planes where you maybe need 50. So throwing out stuff that you don't need, whether it's visually when looking at the venue and using your laser tool, or whether it's in your computer, it's always the same process in the end. Simplify what can be simplified. And it's perfectly fine. You will not get it right the first time around you try that. No, nobody does. So this is absolutely not negative. This doesn't mean you have no idea how to do it. It's always takes practice. Our job takes practice. Otherwise, anybody could do it. And then we would have, you know, all of us would be Sound System Designers of the Year award winners. Unfortunately, there's always a selection process, you know, where we see, okay, some people have spent a little bit more time and effort, and this shows simply. So getting experience with whatever you're doing, whatever tool you're using is crucial here. So yeah, that I think takes us to the end. Thank you very much for participating today. So there was a lot of you here from all the way back to Vancouver. So hopefully nobody perhaps says, hey, but you know, I'm from even farther away. I'm from Hawaii. Anybody from Hawaii here? No. So thank you for spending this hour of your morning, I suppose, with us. We all know at the moment, the whole touring thing is not really as active for the known reasons, but we're also convinced that this will come back. So we will be, again, the guys dressed in black, not visible in the background, that make, you know, people have a great evening, a great day, a great festival. And I believe this will never really die out. You can't do this via a video game. This doesn't just work. It's not the same thing as actually going to a show. So this will come back. We unfortunately need to hold out. It's not going to be easy, but this will come back. And then hopefully we're looking forward to many, many great shows and obviously many great contributions to the venue database. So this whole thing grows with you because it's a community project. So thank you, Liam, for spending the time. Thank you, Santiago, for spending the time with us. And thank you, Lisa, for minding all the questions in the background. We wish you all a beautiful remaining day. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we meet back in catering soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
See ya.